On a night in August 1986, the residents of a small rural village in West Africa heard a very loud noise coming from outside. They thought it was the sound of thunder, so they didn't bother to find out its source. But they didn't realize that this sound was a death sentence for them. You might think this is a science fiction story, but the scary part is that it's a true story. What's even scarier is that it could happen again at any time. Continue watching the video to find out what the story is. Before sunrise on August the 22nd, 1986, there was a man named Ephraim Chie who woke up feeling dizzy and confused. This man lived in a mud hut that was situated on the edge of a cliff. As he sat on the bed, he began trying to remember what had happened the previous night. His mind was foggy, and he couldn't clearly recall the events, so he tried to regain his memory. The image in his mind was fragmented, and he tried to piece together the scattered fragments in his mind to complete the picture and remember what had happened. The only thing he remembered from the previous night was that the last thing he heard was a very loud noise, similar to thunder. He thought it was going to rain, but he couldn't remember what happened after hearing the thunder. He couldn't remember when he fell asleep on his bed after hearing that noise. He only remembered that he felt extremely tired before falling asleep. That's all he could remember from the previous night. On the morning of August 22nd, when he woke up feeling confused and his mind foggy, he looked out the window next to his bed to see the outside view. He saw a very clear sky and dry grass, with no signs of rain the previous night or any recent time. Ephraim felt that something unusual was happening, but he couldn't understand what it was. He got out of bed and stood up, but he felt dizzy and unsteady, though he eventually managed to regain his balance. The first thing that came to his mind was to check on his 4 children, but instead, as if his mind wasn't able to control his body, he found himself unconsciously leaving the hut and standing in front of its door. He began walking and walking without knowing where he was going, as if his feet were leading him, and he was unable to control them. The village where Ephraim lived was called Nios, a very primitive village with no electricity, no water taps in the houses, and no paved roads. The village was divided into 2 parts, an upper part and a lower part. Ephraim lived in the upper part, which was on a mountain or high hills. The mountains surrounded the lake in a circular shape. Most of the villagers lived in the lower part, directly near the lake. On that morning, Ephraim found himself standing in front of his hut for no apparent reason, so he began looking around for any of the neighbors who lived near him in the upper part of the village. He wanted to speak with someone to find reassurance. Was he okay? Were the people around him okay? Was he still alive or dead? What was happening around him? But as he searched with his eyes for someone to talk to, he did not see any living creature in front of him, nor did he hear anyone speaking. He was alone in this place. Without any further thought, he decided to descend from the elevated area where he lived in the upper part of the village and go down to the residents who lived by the lake in the lower part. He wanted to speak with someone to find reassurance. As he was descending halfway to the lake, he stopped and noticed something strange. Normally, the sounds of baboons could be heard in this area, and the baboons would make loud noises. But he did not hear a single sound from any of the baboons. Not only that, but he didn't even hear the buzzing of insects or the chirping of birds. The world around him was eerily quiet. Even the mosquitoes that were widespread in the area, whose buzzing sound used to bother Ephraim, were nowhere to be found. It was as if the world around him had been put on silent mode, like putting your phone in airplane mode. There were no signs of life. While Ephraim was looking around, not understanding what was happening, he suddenly heard a woman screaming. He quickly looked towards the source of the sound and saw the woman who was screaming about 30 meters away from him. She was sitting on the ground and was almost half naked. She was tearing off what remained of her clothes and throwing them away as she screamed loudly. Instinctively, without any thought, Ephraim found himself running quickly towards the woman. As he got closer, strange things began to appear around her on the ground. At first, these things were unclear, but as he got closer, he discovered that they were members of the woman's family, all lying on the ground around her. Their livestock was also lying on the ground around them. When he continued focusing on the appearance of the people and livestock lying on the ground, he discovered there was blood around their noses and mouths. At that moment, he realized that no one was asleep, neither human nor animal. They were all dead, both people and their animals. He stood amidst this scene, stunned, while the woman who was screaming was holding her dead father's arm, trying to pull him to wake him up. Ephraim did not know how to convince this woman, in her state, that her entire family was dead. He wanted to help her and comfort her, but the fear inside him was much stronger than his desire to solve this woman's problem. He felt that something terrifying and strange was happening, but he didn't know what it was. Since waking up, he couldn't remember what had happened to him the previous night. Now, he saw people and animals dead. His mind was in shock and unable to process the situation. Despite his panic, he gave the woman screaming over her family one last look, turned his back, and continued running, terrified, toward the lower part of the village. The lower part of the village was inhabited by people living in mud huts with tin roofs. The lower part of the village of Nios, near the lake, was always a lively and bustling place. You could see the villagers moving around by the lake, children playing, animals walking alongside them, and some playing music on drums. Life was always full of movement and activity in this part, but when he arrived, terrified, there was an eerie silence. He saw no people or animals in front of him. He walked along the main roads, looking for any human presence, but found none. When he looked around these roads, he saw all the animals in the village dead. Animal corpses were scattered everywhere, and he did not see a single human from the village. His fear increased. Where did these people disappear to? He ran to the first hut he encountered and quickly opened its door to see what had happened to the people. He saw a dead woman lying on the ground beside a bowl full of corn. It seemed she had died while eating, and the bowl had fallen from her hand. He looked around to see where the rest of her family was and found them at the far end of the hut, lying on the ground. He focused on their chests. They were still and not moving, with no inhalation or exhalation, and he knew the rest of her family was dead. He ran out of the hut, terrified, and began to focus on the animal corpses lying on the ground. He initially thought all these bodies were of animals when he saw them from a distance, but when he looked closer, he discovered that most of the bodies were of humans. Some had died at their doorsteps, while others had died while riding motorcycles. Most of the bodies were naked or nearly naked, as if their owners had been tearing off their clothes before dying, just like the woman he saw ripping her clothes and screaming over her dead family. Ephraim was shocked by this horrific and strange scene. And the strange thing was that the people who had died had no signs of wounds or bruises on their bodies. It was as if they had been living their lives normally and suddenly died and fell where they were, as if their souls had been snatched away all at once. Ephraim continued on his way, hoping to find anyone still alive to tell him what had happened. Then he saw two people walking on the road, coming toward him. It was clear they were a man and his son. As they got closer to him, they stumbled over the bodies, but got up to continue on their way. When the two got close to Ephraim, their appearance was terrifying. The father and son had their eyes wide open and shining, with their mouths open, looking straight ahead as if they were zombies. They didn't stop in front of Ephraim or speak to him. They just kept walking their way as if they didn't see him, looking straight ahead like zombies until they entered the forest and disappeared from Ephraim's sight. Ephraim's memory gradually started to return, and he remembered a story his grandfather had told him when he was a child. The story spoke of a famous legend in their village, recounting that some villagers from Nios decided to cross the lake from one shore to the other. Their leader or king had great magical power, and with his hands, he parted the lake in two, creating a path in the middle of the lake bed they could walk through. The villagers began to follow their leader along this path to cross the lake, and the water on either side of the path was frozen in place like icebergs. While crossing, a mosquito landed on the leader's shoulder, and when he tried to kill it, he lost control of his magic. The water mountains around them collapsed, and they drowned in the lake's depths. His grandfather had told him when he was a child that the ghosts of those drowned villagers were trapped between two rocks near the lake in the lower part of the village of Nios. Therefore, Ephraim and another group of villagers built their houses or huts in the higher areas, believing they were safe from the ghosts in the lower part. Ephraim remembered the story he had heard from his grandfather at that moment, and thought that everything that happened in the village was due to the ghosts. He believed the ghosts had appeared and killed the people and animals, so he ran away, fearing the ghosts might attack and kill him. As he ran, he opened the doors of huts, hoping to find someone still alive. Each time he entered a house, he found its residents dead on chairs, on beds, or on the ground. After running for some time, he found a hut and opened its door, discovering its owner, Joseph McQueen, still alive, but in a much worse state than Ephraim. The night before, just before Joseph went to sleep, he heard a very loud sound, like thunder, the same sound Ephraim had heard before going to sleep. After hearing that sound, Joseph noticed that his daughter was snoring very loudly and frighteningly, so he went to check on her. But after taking only a few steps, he fell to the ground. He woke up the next morning to find bruises and cuts on his hands from the fall, his body extremely exhausted, and his mind confused and disoriented, just like Ephraim. In his state, Joseph continued to crawl on the ground to reach his daughter's bed until he reached her and confirmed that she was dead. Joseph got up and left the hut, witnessing the horrifying sight of dead people and animals in the streets. Ephraim stood beside him, waiting for any reaction, but the man was completely silent, shocked. Neither spoke to the other. They looked at each other and then at the bodies of people and animals around them. Finally, one of them extended his hand, and the other shook it. At first, the two walked together, looking at this terrifying scene. Later, Joseph left Ephraim and went to check on the people in their homes. Each time he entered a hut, he found the people dead inside. The same scenario Ephraim had experienced. Joseph said, "No, this is serious. I will need help." Joseph returned to his hut, took his motorcycle, and rode to the nearest village to his own. When he arrived at the other village, he found that things were normal. The people were still living their lives as usual. Joseph tried to talk to the villagers, pleading with them and explaining the disaster that had occurred in his village, but he found it difficult to speak, his tongue heavy and stuttering from shock. As they listened to him in his state, saying that his entire village had died and that people and livestock had died without reason, the villagers thought the man was crazy, joking, or drunk. No one believed him, and no one said, "Let's go see. Maybe he's telling the truth, and we can see what happened to the people in his village." No one cared about his words that day, but the next day, some villagers began to think about what Joseph had said. They said, "Maybe the man's words are true. Let's go to his village and see for ourselves. We have nothing to lose." Indeed, a group of villagers went to Naioz, Joseph's village, and confirmed that what he said was true. They found the bodies of people and animals lying in the streets. News reached the authorities in Cameroon, the country where the village is located, and they sent investigators who discovered that this mass death had not only happened in Naioz, but also in another nearby village, though with fewer casualties. The news spread worldwide 3 days after the incident on August 25th, 1986. An American scientist named Joseph Devine was watching the news on television and saw reports of the incident from Cameroon, where the authorities did not know how these people and their animals had died. Devine heard the news in shock, immediately picked up the phone and called senior officials in the U.S. government, saying, "I need a plane to take me to Nios immediately." The plane was prepared, and he traveled with his partner, another scientist named Harold Sigurdsson, heading to Nios in Cameroon 2 days later, on August 27th. When they arrived, they found the army burying the dead in mass graves. They met survivors of the incident, like Joseph and Ephraim. After investigating with them, they heard strange theories, such as that this could be the result of experiments with super weapons or a nuclear explosion, while others believed ghosts killed the people and animals. But these two scientists were sure that none of this was true, and they knew the reason was something else. A similar incident had occurred 2 years earlier, though it was a smaller incident 97 kilometers from Nios at a lake called Monoun, where 37 people had died. The scientists began investigating the incident through experiments, analyses, and tests, and they developed a theory to explain what had happened, which they called the unknown natural hazard. The scientists warned all the residents in that area that this could happen again. Sigurdsson wrote numerous scientific articles about this theory and submitted them to a renowned scientific journal for publication. But no one paid attention to their warnings. People thought their words were unreasonable or exaggerated. However, when the unknown natural hazard reoccurred in Nios village and the scientists saw the military burying people in mass graves, they decided to head directly to the lake near Nios. They took samples of the lake's bottom water and conducted tests, confirming the validity of the unknown natural hazard theory. But what does this mean? Lake Nios is not an ordinary lake. It's a volcanic lake. This means the lake sits above a dormant volcanic crater. A volcanic crater is a very deep hole, formed by a previous or ancient volcanic explosion. With rainfall and floods, the crater fills with water, forming the lake. Even though the volcano is dormant, a large amount of carbon dioxide, CO2, is trapped at the bottom of Lake Nios. Carbon dioxide is an invisible and odorless gas. If a person inhales a small amount, they won't be harmed, but if the concentration increases slightly, they will feel dizzy, nauseous, feel like their skin is burning, breathe rapidly, and enter a horrific state. If someone inhales a large amount of gas all at once, they will die immediately. The carbon dioxide was trapped at the bottom of Lake Nios. On the night of August 21st, 1986, something happened that caused the release of the trapped gas. Before Ephraim lost consciousness, he remembered that the last thing he heard was a sound like thunder. And Joseph also mentioned hearing this sound. No one knows exactly what caused this noise, but it's certain that it's related to the gas release from the lake. There might have been a rock slide where rocks fell into the bottom of the lake and hit it, releasing the gas. Or perhaps there was a volcanic eruption at the lake's bottom that released the gas. Whatever the cause, the gas was released from the lake's bottom, and bubbles began rising from the bottom to the surface, forming a cloud above it. This cloud was invisible, but it existed. The cloud began spreading, and people, animals, and insects in the villages surrounding the lake inhaled it, which is what killed them all. As for the few people who survived, like Ephraim and Joseph, it is possible that they only inhaled small amounts of gas. or that their bodies were somehow resistant to carbon dioxide poisoning. When they regained consciousness and moved to areas with fresh air, they began to recover gradually, and their minds started to awaken from the dizziness. This is the same carbon dioxide phenomenon that occurred 2 years earlier at Lake Manoon, causing a small number of deaths. This was the unknown natural hazard the scientists warned about, indicating it could happen again. Unfortunately, it did recur in Nios village, resulting in 1,700 deaths and more than 3,500 livestock deaths. These figures are approximate, and the actual numbers could be much higher. Although the authorities in Cameroon warned the residents and villagers about the toxic lake, advising them not to go near it or live nearby. After the incident, Ephraim, Joseph, and other survivors returned to live near the toxic lake once again. If you enjoyed the chills, don't forget to give us a like. Subscribe for more tales that will haunt you. And until then, remember to sleep with one eye open.